I'm here today with one of our applicant speakers, Dan Tubbs. So, Dan, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you very much for having me.
Great. So, do you want to give a quick rundown on who you are, essentially, what your background is, and why you're so interested in speaking here?
Yeah. So look, I'll tell you who I am and the basis of the speech which I'm planning to give. But then it's probably worth going into sort of the politics and what got me here and what sort of drove me to make a break from the world that I was in to what I'm sort of looking to do now. Because for a long time I was. I wouldn't go so far as to say I was a creature of the establishment because I always sort of bristled against certain elements of it. But I'm a guy who worked in the city for 20 years, most of that as a venture capitalist or a fund manager. Although I did have a couple of breaks to start and then later sell businesses, but I sort of kept on returning to that world. And I also dipped in and out of conservative politics for quite a time, so I know a decent number of the people that you see on TV now. I've got their numbers on my phone, although I sort of burnt my bridges to a large extent because of the absolute venom that I sent them over the lockdown period. I have sort of made a break from that world because I was one of those guys, who acquired a certain skill set, and I could have quite happily, just carried on in that world or do what I was doing, which was, sit at home with my trading screens and just, bop along.
So, when you say venture capitalists, people start immediately thinking of Teal Books. So, are you going to be subscribing to everyone's Substack and giving them money, or does it mean something quite different?
The way I used to describe it was, everybody had seen, what was it, Dragon's Den? So it was basically that was the job. People would come in and sort of pitch for money. Although that's only the sort of the first aspect of it. You do a lot of due diligence, and then you work with that company over the next sort of 3 or 4 years, or 5 or 6 years, however long it takes, and then you sort of hopefully get them to an exit and sell them to someone else. Hopefully having grown the business considerably. So that was a large element of what I did. The other bit was it was fund management, so sort of looking at the whole market and sort of taking into respect those sort of global macro conditions that were going on at the time. Although I
was going to say, did you ever sell anyone to BlackRock?
No. No, they're a big sort of institutional fund manager, and the sort of scale that they're dealing with, they don't really go for the sort of the venture stuff. They have to go for sort of the very biggest companies because nothing else sort of meets their liquidity requirements. But it was not a completely dissimilar world to that. And like I say, I also sort of had lots of contacts in politics, and it was something that I dipped in and out of quite a bit. Okay, and I had sort of been making a break from that world for a while. But the whole COVID period, it just completely knocked me out of it. It was such a bad faith move, from basically the entire establishment, that it became clear that they were running a psyop against us. It was something that I felt, okay, no, I have to stop what I'm doing, and I need to focus on combating this. It is that important. In fact, I'm reminded of, I think another speaker at the event is going to be Carl Benjamin. Yes. He's going to be talking there. Yeah. So he did a live event in London a few years back. It could have been 5-6 years ago. He rented out this hall. It was the first live event he did. And one of the questions he got is, why do you do this? Now, obviously he's been very successful in this world, and he's got a, significant Patreon and all the rest of it. But the answer he gave is that he felt compelled to do it. He felt that he had to do it because, if he didn't do it, who would? And I sort of understood that answer at the time. But more recently, I have completely understood that. I've got young kids, and I'm seriously concerned about the world that we're going to be heading to.
Yep.
Because I understand what's going on in the monetary conditions and the levers that are being pulled. I can see in the not too distant future that we're going to have a significant crossroads coming up. And one option out of that is going to be a freer future. And the other one is going to be, quite frankly, a digital dystopia hell. And I cannot tolerate my kids growing up in the latter of those two worlds. And so that's why I feel that I have to do this. I have to give up the world that I've come from. I need to burn those bridges, and I need to sort of go into battle against this. And so, okay, so coming to the point of the talk, I think that on the distant right, there are I think people are pointing in the right directions, but they sometimes get some of the nuances wrong. So, for example, when people talk about the Great Reset, that's often described as an attempt by the elite to crash the financial system in order to gain control.
Yes.
That's not what's happening. What's happening is that the financial system, as it is doomed to die. It will die. It has inherent flaws. And part of my talk is going to be describing what those inherent flaws are and why this system will collapse. It has to collapse. The only thing that they're doing at the moment is they're trying to kick that can down the road as far as possible. What the Great Reset is, it is a package of policy initiatives so that the people who are wealthy and powerful now get to remain wealthy and powerful on the other side of that reset. Yeah. That's why it's so heavy on control mechanisms, on digital ID, central bank digital currencies. And what I kind of want to get into is, let's understand what's going on. Let's understand where they're vulnerable, and let's understand where it is most appropriate for us to push. What are those chinks in the armor?
So that's your focus, really. You say this is going to be a disaster, and we need to push back against it. So you're not going to be arguing for any rider tiger type mechanisms where you can say this is how you would hook your boat to the ship, and hopefully be able to get some prosperity in the future world to be able to take it over at a later date. You say no, this needs to be fought now.
Well, I think it does, because I couldn't forgive myself if we ended up in the form of those two scenarios that I described, that fork road that we've got coming up, and I hadn't done everything that I could do to push back against it. That said, I think that the odds are probably stacked against us. It's probably something like 60-40 as to which future we end up in. I'm not necessarily sure whether it's 60-40 in our favour or their favour.
Mm-hmm.
But it is an open bid either way. And maybe at some point I'll lose a bit of hope, and I'll say, instead of targeted pushback, maybe it's a question of we just prepare those people who want to be prepared, those people who want to sort of build a life raft for themselves. Maybe that's the best we can do. But at the moment, I think that it is a bit open. There are shots that we can fire, and I don't think that the collapse of this system is necessarily imminent. It's one of those things that it could be. Nobody gets to predict when this stuff comes crashing down. But for my money, I think that the real crunch point is going to be the latter part of this decade, probably the early part of the next. So I feel that we do have a bit of time to prepare. And people on the dissident right, they have an opportunity to effectively birth a generation that are equipped with the know-how to push back against a lot of this stuff. And I think the dissident right is getting an awful lot correct at the moment. I think it is doing terrific work, but there are one or two elements which I feel that they're missing out on that I can probably add to, and so I feel compelled to do that. And that's what I'm trying to do at the moment. I'm trying to add into this debate with those aspects and just sort of flesh out the whole.
Okay, fantastic. You mentioned lockdown in particular was the straw that broke the camel's back for you, but you were always never quite part of the establishment. You never quite felt part of the club or comfortable being part of the club.
Yeah, should I describe that actually? Yeah. Okay, so look. For a long time, I thought that I was a Tory.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that I thought that is because I was a Thatcherite.
Uh-huh.
What I didn't quite understand at the time, in my sort of younger years, is that the reason I thought I was a Thatcherite is because Thatcher was animated by a political philosophy which I ascribed to myself. So it was Frederick von Mises, it was von Hayek, it was probably a bit of Rothbard in there as well, but it was that sort of very much sort of individual empowerment, small state, low taxes. She famously walked into one of her early cabinet meetings and she slapped down a book. It could have been a
Road to Serfdom.
Yes, Road to Serfdom, and said this is what we believe. And because of that, I sort of started my journey thinking that I was a Tory. But what I didn't understand is that Thatcher was not really a Tory. She was an aberration.
Mm-hmm.
She was not typical of them. And what I found is, as I sort of went on, I was coming increasingly detached, but I didn't understand that early on. So, I started to get quite involved. First of all, I was on the team that Patillo put together to make his leadership bid.
Okay. Yep.
And I got to know a lot of people there. I mean, so for example, the office I was working in had a bunch of characters, including Priti Patel. So I worked with her. Well, I say worked. I mean, I worked. She turned up and made sure that everybody who walked through that office knew her name, and she contributed nothing at all. But I've got lots.
She was the politician.
Yeah. Yes. And I'll tell you another thing is, it was quite obvious what she was doing, and I asked her the question one day, and I already knew the answer. It's, do you want to be a politician yourself one day? Because she wasn't at the time, and she gave me the most scripted answer, which was, no, I just believe in the whole process and stuff like that. But she was a climber from the very beginning, and I think it tells you something about the system. That's the sort of person who ultimately ends up succeeding. It's not necessarily people of ability, people who actually deliver, and I think it's people who are skilled in sort of getting those sort of connections and climbing up. So but nevertheless. I knew a lot of these people, and I dipped in and out of that world while I was in finance. But I could always tell that there was something, not right. And I think, in retrospect, where it really started to go wrong, and this is something that Peter Hitchens picked up very clearly at the time, and a lot of us didn't, is that the move to Cameronism was really the end of the party as a viable centre-right offering.
Mm-hmm.
He turned it into basically a blue Blairite party. And I remember having so many arguments with, government ministers back then. They were saying, because they didn't describe themselves as Blairites, they described themselves as modernisers. And they said, we have to do this. This is what the public want. It's the direction that we are moving in. And I always used to argue with them and say, no, it's, the pendulum is going to swing back the other way. You've got to stick to your core. It's got to be traditional rights of the individual. It's got to be small state. But there was considerable pushback against that the whole time.
And so you've seen Cameron today or yesterday, I believe it was, saying how proud he was of this, what he calls the modernisation efforts, and saying one of the first things that he did when he became leader of the Tory party was to do all 50% women or BAME shortlists, I believe, because he was like, well, too many white males. And he was saying this, before 2010. So
weirdly, that is slightly to the benefit of the right. I'll tell you why. Because what Cameron did is he called it modernisation. What it really is Blairite. It's social conservatism. One of the first things he did was stop any white male who was an actual conservative from getting selected to become an MP. At the same time, he also made a big push for the BAME.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, you're dealing with a much smaller pool of potential candidates amongst the BAME. And the only ones who really want to go down that route of becoming a Tory MP are going to be those who are really right-wing. So that's why, when you get to today, the only passably right-wing candidates in the leadership election have been Sula Braverman and Kemi Badenoch. Both of those are obviously BAME women. And the reason being is because there are no younger white males in the party anymore who have conservative values. They're all complete Blairites. So actually, by Cameron doing that, if it wasn't for his push for BAME, he would have successfully eliminated anyone who was an actual conservative in the party at this point, and it would basically be just Blue Labour.
Okay, well, that's an interesting way of looking at it. Most people just say you were signing up to the progressive hymn sheet and becoming what the Labour Party wanted by getting rid of a white male leadership. But
I mean, I think that's that's ultimately where we got to, and I've completely given up with them at this point. But I'm just saying that the only element that you get even twinges of what it used to be as a right-wing party is in those BAME candidates, whereas everyone else, the only sort of sensible Tories you've got left are people who are basically leaving. It's the Desmond Swains, it's Charles Walkers. Those are the people who are sort of on their way out at this point. But throughout those years, I could see that there was something going desperately wrong in the thinking of it. I remember many times making my breakfast in the kitchen in the morning, listening to the radio. And there was always, some government policy which was chasing Guardian headlines. It would be, we're going to spend 400 million on this, or we're going to spend, 60 million on that, or whatever it is. It was always, chasing the left-wing agenda, trying to respond to their points by spending government money. And I was always grinding my teeth about it because, these policies have real implications. So, give you an example. I remember not so long ago, the current government went off to the CAP, that climate policy, and they just decided to announce that 290 million, I think they said, for countries most affected by climate change. Mm-hmm. So, you start to think that through. Okay, so the average worker, they get about 32k a year, about the average wage. So on that, you're going to be paying about $4,000 of tax, that maybe another $3,000 in national insurance, so about $7,000 a year you're going to be paying in tax. So you think about it, 290 million divided by 7k, that's about 40,000 people who are going to be working that year just because the government wanted to get a promising headline in the Guardian the following day. So I was already, and that's a recent policy, but you got that all the time during the Cameron era. And so I found myself increasingly sort of getting torn further and further away from this. And I got stuck in that thing that people get stuck in for so long, which is, well, Labour is worse. Before you get that sort of final breakdown and realisation that it's actually a uniparty, there is no effective difference, that they have all the same policies. So I was already separating significantly from that. Then, of course, we got the Brexit thing.
Yep. Were you on the side of Brexit?
I was on the side of Brexit, and actually, I had been anticipating that the establishment was going to try and trip us up on that. Yes. So I remember, there was an event for people who've been active, either contributing or some other thing for the Brexit campaign in some bar a few days before the vote was known. And I think I was talking to Dan Hannan and Melanie Phillips, and I was saying, guys, we are going to win, and they were doubting. They're saying, I don't know if we will win. I said, no, we will definitely win. But what will happen is the establishment won't let us have the win, and nobody there could believe that would happen. And actually, that is exactly what happened. We did get the win. The establishment turned against us. So that in itself, that wasn't utterly shocking to me because I anticipated that it was going to come. But all the same, again, it adds to that sort of, that drift and that push away from, even, the majority of what was supposed to be the centre-right party was campaigning against it. Yep. And then we got the Trump thing. And look, I don't want to get your channel banned, but, obviously at 3 a.m., they drafted in Neil Ferguson to start counting the Biden votes.
And he became the most popular president ever.
It turned out that Obama only actually won because he had Biden as his VP.
Who knew?
Should have gone with him in the first place. And that was striking because that was the first sort of open war that, you long suspect that democracy is a bit of a sham, but there it is laid completely bare. That the moment democracy gets in the way, it will be swept aside. And yes, that's the US, but...
Well, heavily fortified, I think, is the right term.
Exactly, yeah. But it's that appreciation that the Western Anglosphere values, they will be swept aside at a moment's notice. That the sort of the beast is unveiling itself effectively at that point. So that was pretty shocking. And then, of course, we get into, the COVID thing ramps up. And the bit that really triggered me was actually the masks. And the reason being is because you could sort of make the argument at all the other points, but they were just misguided or making stupid decisions or they had bad advice. The mask thing was laid absolutely bare because they spent about 3 weeks going on TV and saying, these things don't have any value whatsoever. I put up videos on my channel, where I've got all the top guys sort of explaining this, and then they go in and they mandate them. Mm-hmm. So, obviously, people who were skeptical, had ample indication that the machine has sort of turned against us long before that point. But that was the point where it was absolutely explicit. There was no excuse that you could possibly make. The only possible explanation is that they were running a psyop against us, that they are sort of pushing against us. And also at that time,
for the mass thing, I think it was fairly clear from the beginning that the establishment did think masks worked, and they were just trying to secure supply for the medical staff. That's what it seemed to me obvious at the time, and as soon as there was enough global supply of masks again, then they would say, right, now it's not just medical workers, it's everyone.
I take a different view on that. I think that they don't work in the slightest.
I know, no, they don't work, but they think they work enough that they. Well, that was my opinion. That this is what they were doing. They thought they worked enough that they needed to mandate them, but they couldn't mandate them without people saying, "But what about our NHS?"
Yeah, I think that they thought that they were a useful tool to spread fear.
Well, yeah, that too.
It is that sort of push for that fear, that sort of that running of that psyop against us.
Mm-hmm.
Now, at the same time that this was happening, I was noticing that basically the money supply was shooting up. So, I mean, weirdly, it worked out incredibly well for me because I recognised that the effect that an increased money supply was going to have, and I sort of invested accordingly.
Mm-hmm.
I find it striking that people normally judge lockdown on how they personally came out of it. So, you know, if they were part of the laptop class and actually they quite enjoyed being at home in their garden, you know, they tend to think favourably of lockdown and the set of policies that came along with it from a purely selfish point of view. So actually, from a purely selfish point of view, lockdown was absolutely brilliant for me because the things that they were able to ram through on the back of it, you know, did my portfolio extremely well.
Yes.
But the principle of what they was doing, the clear marking that, you know, all of these sort of ancient English liberties were theirs to take away whenever they damn well pleased, and that they would use it to bring in all sorts of coercive measures. And worst of all, I mean, the genuinely terrifying aspect was the medications that they were pushing and the claims that they were making, which they could not possibly know to be true at the time that they were making them.
Mm-hmm.
Coupled with the fact that, I mean, I know a young woman. She's in a sort of mid-20s.
Look at you.
Very active runner.
Yes.
She lives for running. She took the medication, and it destroyed 30% of her lung tissue.
Christ.
And like I say, this is a young woman who lived for running, and now, you know, I'm a big old fat bastard, and I can outrun her.
Wow. Yeah.
And we were sort of getting to the stage where I was wondering, are they going to mandate it for my kids?
Yep.
You know, me and the wife were sitting down almost every evening for you know, quite a long period, saying, is tomorrow the day that we lock up everything and we go and get on a plane to Mexico, or, you know, or wherever it is that we think we need to get to? You know, it was horrifying, that sort of point, especially for somebody like me, because, you know, I've looked at, you know, when governments go wrong. You know, I've travelled to places like the extermination camps in Poland, to the killing fields in Cambodia, to the, you know, torture chambers in Budapest. You know, I've seen many examples of when governments go wrong, and I've read the histories, and I was seeing so many echoes of that coerciveness that was going through. And also because, you know, I'm quite good with numbers, when you start to sort of, you know, follow through some of the logic. So, for example, Germany and Austria, you know, they did actually say they were going to go down the mandatory vaccine route. And you just need to look at the number of people that weren't playing along with that. And the only way that they could have got compliance, and I put out various threads on Twitter about this, was building literally, you know, tens of thousands of concentration camps for their own citizens.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they didn't end up going down that route, but I bet they thought about it. I bet they planned it.
They cut close. Austria in particular, I can't remember the fines that they were giving to unvaccinated or unmedicated, people, but it was quite substantial, what they were planning on doing. And when Austria in particular started issuing those fines, that's when I got really worried myself.
Yeah, and, you know, they did pull back from it.
Yes.
But what if it was only 5% of people in each country who chose not to have the medication? You know, at that point, you know, maybe they would have built the necessary 6,000 concentration camps in each country necessary to maybe to push all the way. We don't know, but we certainly understand now that the only reason why government don't do this is because they believe that it's not practical or they can't get away with it yet. It is simply not a question of them not wanting to do it. There has been a fundamental shift in the social contract. There was a time, I think, for perhaps my earlier life, where the government saw itself there effectively to serve us. Maybe that's a bit naive, even going back to the 80s. But there was certainly a sense, an ethos in the country that the government was there to serve.
Mm-hmm.
And now I believe that they believe quite firmly that the population are a problem to be managed. And I think they spend a lot of their time thinking about how do we best contain this problem that is our population? How do we make them do the things that they must do? It is that apotheosis of it's the managerial mindset.
Yes.
Taken to this extreme, pushed to that globalist level. The only thing that's saving us at this point is its sheer incompetence. I could talk about the proxy war that's going on in the Ukraine at the moment, and the sanctions and the pushback. They were so obviously going to backfire, and they have backfired to such an enormous extent. I do quite a lot of radio interviews, and that's one of the things that I talk about on a fairly regular basis is the absolute nut punching that Germany is giving itself on an almost weekly basis at this point.
It's staggering. You've seen that Gazprom today or yesterday have announced that they're just going to shut off supply unilaterally. It's insane. It's insane what's going to happen to prices of energy.
Yeah, and I mean, and for Germany to have done the kind of things it does, I mean, we are somewhat insulated in that we get a lot of our energy from Norway, but the push that they make, and so obviously, these things have not been planned effectively. I think I understand the agenda behind it because it's all about that end of a unipolar world. It is the rise of a sort of Eurasian bloc. Something I love to talk about, but that's not going to be the topic of the talk at the event. But all of these things, the only thing that's saving us at this point is their incompetence and the fact that their plans have not matured to the point where they're able to do it. But I think they do have their eye on the latter part of this decade, the latter part of the 2020s, when a lot of these agendas are going to be significantly more advanced than they are now. And at that stage, they will have the tools necessary to complete a lot of what was started at the beginning of 2020.
Yeah.
Now, does that mean they will necessarily sort of lock us down and put us all under house arrest? Probably not. But what they will do is they will enact agendas that will either hand them control and we will give it over willingly, including things like UBI. I mean, that's a very good way in order to sort of get us to hand over power to them. And if we push back, they will have the tool set to basically just push ahead and do it anyway. So I sort of see I see the remainder of this decade as an opportunity to either to push back and to stop some of these things before they happen, or to give up entirely and leave the country, because I do not want to be in Western Europe when the inevitable happens to the monetary system.
No, and I think you find a lot of like minds at the event as well. I've been talking to my family about what to do in that sort of scenario. My parents are saying just move to South America, start planning it already. And I think there's a lot of people thinking in a similar way. So there should be plenty of like minds within the audience for you to talk to and discuss. And one of the things we like to do at the Witan is, because we're bringing together so many intelligent people, speakers like yourself, it attracts quite a high caliber of audience. People commented on this a lot last year. So
that is definitely what attracts me the most. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to go last year. I really wanted to, but there was a conflict and I couldn't make it last year. But for me, certainly the most appealing thing, it is going to be the quality of the audience. And I know at the end of my talk that I'm going to be putting up a couple of potential solutions, some of which may be controversial with some of the audience. And so, as I think we talked about earlier before we went live on air, I said I would actually like to speak fairly early in the event so that people can come up and challenge me afterwards and we can get into those sort of really interesting side discussions. And I think it's that quality of the audience which makes this thing so appealing.
Well, fantastic. I'll put links to your Twitter and a few other places in the description. And if everyone wants to go and make sure you buy tickets so you can hear Dan's plans for the future of the Western world and how to save it. Then yeah, please do come along in August and make sure to subscribe to this channel for more. And I think unless you have anything else to say, I think that it's a good place to end it.
No, thanks for having me, and looking forward to meeting you in person.
Fantastic. All right, great. Speak to you soon.
Cheers. Bye.